Sarah?
Yeah, that's me.
Come on, let's go in. Go ahead, have a seat by the laptops.
Thank you.
Hi Sarah, I'm Colin and this is Zara and we'll be doing your check-in today. We were just taking a look at your GitHub repo from Snake, so we're going to walk through 3 separate questions related to the design and implementation of your program. Do you have your code up?
Yep.
Great. We encourage you to use it as a reference point and even point out specific parts in the code that are relevant. Feel free to take a second to think after we ask your questions. Do you have any questions before we start?
I don't think so.
All right, great. So we'll start off with your first question. We see that in your game class, you chose to associate the score label with your game. Can you explain why you chose to have that association?
Yeah, sure. Let me just pull up the game class and think for a second. Okay, so in my game class, I need to access the score label, so it needs to know about the label, but I actually create the label in the pane organizer so that I can add it to my pane. So I have to create the association so both classes can use the same instance of label.
Okay, that's great. Can you show us the code where you need the access for the label in the game?
Sure. Down here, I do this.scoreLabel.setText to change the text of the label with the updated score. Does that make sense?
Yep. Great. And is there another way you can design this program without using that association? And you could give an example for that. It doesn't have to be good design.
Yeah, so I guess if I combined the pane organizer and the game class into one class, then I wouldn't actually need the association since it would then deal with adding the label and updating the label in the same class.
All right, that's great. Let's move on to the next question.
So for our next question, can you walk us through the code you have to generate random pellets on the board? Feel free to pull it up and walk us through it.
Okay, so I'll just pull up my board class and find the right method. So I have this spawn food method.
Could you please just turn your laptop so we can see what you're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. So here's my board class, and then this is the method that I was talking about. So in spawn food, first I use this helper method called getRandomEmptyTile to find a board square that's empty, and then I use this switch statement kind of like in Fruit Ninja that switches on a random integer up to 10. And the first 2 cases create a yellow pellet, the third case creates a green pellet, and then 3 cases create a black pellet, and then for all the other default cases, it creates red pellet, so that's the most common, and then each of them has a unique score as well.
Great, and can you just talk a little bit more about how you found a random open square?
Okay, yeah, so down here I have my getRandomEmptyTile helper method that returns a board square. So first it uses this do while loop, and it finds a random in between the number of rows and then the number of columns to find a spot on the board, and then it checks if that spot is empty, and if it is empty, it returns the board square at that spot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Can you just explain why I use a do while loop instead of a for loop or a regular while loop?
Yeah, so I knew I definitely didn't want to use a for loop because I wouldn't know exactly how many times I would want to run the loop. But for why I used a do while loop instead of a while loop, I'm not really sure, but I think it's because I knew I was going to want to run the loop at least once and then check the condition of if the tile was empty. So that's why a do while loop made a little more sense than a regular while loop.
Awesome. We just have one more question for you.
All right, can you explain to us why you chose to implement your snake class as a wrapper class and what that means?
Sure, yeah. So if I pull up my snake class, I know it's a wrapper class around an array list of board squares to represent the snake in the game. And because it's a wrapper class, that means the class contains the array list.
All right, that sounds good. And why do you think that is considered good design?
So I think it hides the details of how the snake actually moves from the other classes since they don't actually need to know about that. So for example, it has a move method that changes the array list and sometimes adds to the array list, but it doesn't actually directly let the user of that class change its contents.
All right, that's nice. All right, can you name a specific design principle that we discussed in class that demonstrated by using your wrapper class here?
Yeah, so I think it's an example of encapsulation since the array list is contained as a private instance variable.
All right, that's right. Okay, what's an alternative way you could implement the snake without using a wrapper class? Again, it doesn't have to be perfect or be of good design.
Yeah, So for one, I guess the snake class could use inheritance to extend the array list, or I guess it could also just contain the array list directly in the game class.
Yeah, both sound good. Could you also explain or describe a bit how it's different from using a wrapper class?
Yeah, so for extending the array list, when using the snake class, I think you could then directly call methods like add or remove, since those methods are available through the inheritance, where when I did the wrapper class, it made them private and I couldn't call them.
Great, that sounds good. So this is all we have for you right now, and you did great. So you're free to go.
Thank you guys.
Have a great day.
Bye. Bye.